The Holy Gospel according to Mark. Glory to you, O Lord. As soon as they left the synagogue, they entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Now Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they told Jesus about her at once. He came and took her by the hand and lifted her up. Then the fever left her, and she began to serve them. That evening, at sunset, they brought to him all who were sick or possessed with demons, and the whole city was gathered around the door. And he cured many who were sick with various diseases, and cast out many demons. But he would not permit the demons to speak, because they knew him. In the morning, while it was still very dark, Jesus got up and went out to a deserted place, and there he prayed. And Simon and his companions hunted for him. When they found him, they said to him, "Everyone is searching for you." He answered, "Let us go on to the neighboring towns, so that I may proclaim the message there also, for that is what I came out to do." And so he went throughout Galilee, proclaiming the message in their synagogues and casting out demons. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. I get sick a lot. I always have. I suspect we all know those people who never seem to get sick, who never miss a day of work or school, and who march happily along while everyone else in their house seems to come down with the sniffles. Then, on the other hand, there are those whose annual cold seems to begin in September and go all the way until April. And I am of this second kind, the always sick kind. Not like really sick, but I think I came down with a strep throat something like 6 times when I was a child, and every winter, without fail, I suffer a long, brutal cold. Fortunately for me, I have always had some patient and compassionate people in my midst, people who care for me because they love me. First, my long-suffering mother, my grandmother, my level-headed father, and now, God bless her, my wife. She likes to say that I get sick a lot, which is a bummer, but she has a husband who gets sick a lot, and apparently that's so much worse. None of these people, these kind people, of course, have had the power to eliminate little viruses and other bugs from me by their sheer force of will, but they have shown their loving kindness to me in those ways that we all most appreciate when under the weather, by making us food, keeping us warm, commiserating, just being there. They usually can't fix us, and yet they do seem to heal us. And that is something so much more profound. Our gospel story today is one all about healing. This little passage about Jesus coming into the home of Simon Peter, healing his mother-in-law, and then continuing on in his mission of ministry, is a blink-and-you'll-miss-it episode tucked away at the very beginning of the Gospel of Mark. But I think it tells us really quite a lot about our God, about a God who heals. There are so many stories, of course, about Jesus performing healing miracles in the Bible, across all 4 Gospels. But this is actually the first one in Mark. We think that Mark's was probably the first Gospel to be written down, and so I think it's fair to say that this little story about Jesus relieving Simon's mother-in-law of her fever might actually be the oldest story we have about Jesus as healer. Mark says that Jesus entered this bedroom, took the woman by her hand, and lifted her up. Then the fever left her, and she began to serve them. The first emotional reaction to this story is awe and relief. We all know what it feels like to be sick, after all, and we're happy for this person that she was healed. But after the relief, there is room for some confusion. Perhaps you find it off-putting that once healed, Simon's mother-in-law, an unnamed, heretofore deathly ill woman, leaps up in order to fix supper and serve the men in the house. That is a valid reaction, and one worth thinking about. But I think if we ask of this little story, what do we learn about God? Then I think the answer is a truly comforting one. We learn that God's first priority is the healing of people. We learned that when a woman lay suffering, God took her hand and wiped the tears away from her eyes. We learn that the arc of this story about that evening was all about restoration. We learned that God came not to be served, but to serve others. And so too should we. But what is Jesus doing here exactly? After all, he's in the midst of a preaching tour throughout Galilee. He came from teaching in a synagogue and is on his way to new towns to proclaim the good news of this gospel. After Simon's mother-in-law, once the people of Capernaum had heard that a miraculous healer is in town, naturally, they come rushing, and Jesus heals every one of them. But then he urges his disciples onward, saying, "Let us go on to the neighboring towns, so that I may proclaim the message there also. For that is what I came out to do." So what was he doing here? Was this makeshift impromptu miracle clinic just a very generous break from the principal work of spreading his message? I don't think so. Not only is healing a part of Jesus' message, but in fact, healing is his message in action. Caring for souls, says Dietrich Bonhoeffer, is a special sort of proclamation. I say it's the good news of restoration, of broken people made new again, manifest in people's lives. It shows this God you've been hearing about, his will is powerful, and that will is to heal. This God we're talking about is a God who heals. We find that in almost all stories about Jesus healing, he actually touches the people he heals, connecting with his fingers or his lips or just the hem of his robe with those who are actively suffering. This is a powerful action, especially in a society where physical contact with the sick was very taboo. God cares about human contact. That much is clear. Indeed, God cares about and cares for the little things. We physical creatures can be muchly deceived by matters of magnitude. Big things seem important to us, and little things seem trivial. This is how our minds work, but not how the mind of God works. God who made space and time. God says, "Go out, look up at the stars, the clouds of celestial clusters painted upon the black backdrop of a night of unfathomable immensity. I made this. See how they make the most powerful among you seem like nothing. Now go inside. Look upon this woman, frail, feverish, and suffering. I made her too. She is precious to me. Her shimmering soul and her battered body are of the same divine spark of creative life as my many mighty stars. My son shall touch her, and she shall be healed." But Jesus was not a magician, of course. It's not that he possessed some secret touching gestures or ancient words that by their very performance unlocked the power to heal people. The British preacher Alexander Maclaren wrote, "The curative virtue was in neither the word nor the touch, nor the spittle nor the clay, nor the bathing in the pool of Siloam, but was purely and simply in the outgoing of his will, the love in action of a God who heals." The touch of Jesus' hand may not be with us anymore, but his healing will endures. Now, we already know two difficult things about healing. It's not just about bodies, and it's not always about fixing. As beloved children in God's own image, our bodies, just as they are beautiful and important to God. But for God, healing is not just about our bodies. In healing, God gives power to the faint and strengthens the powerless. In the face of so many ills in this world, God's healing is an outpouring of justice, resurrection, and restoration. God heals his people through the goodness of the word, with the grace of baptism and communion, and through the acts of loving kindness that all of us make in his name, whether we know it or not. God heals, and you and I get to have a part in it, sometimes as a healer, and sometimes as one who is healed. God, in God's wisdom and compassion and intimate interpersonal character, has chosen to work his healing goodness through us, by our hands. We can all be nurse technicians on the team of God, our chief surgeon. It's a hard truth that this healing does not always go exactly the way we want or expect it to. Sometimes people pray for their son to be safe, and he isn't. For the cancer to go away, and it doesn't. For things to go back to normal, and they don't. We all know that pain. The pain of living in a world that sometimes seems to go on turning in its own way, however hard we might try to shift its course. Even Jesus knows this pain. Jesus, seeing intense suffering on the road ahead of him, threw himself onto the ground once and prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. But not what I want, but what you want." Why our almighty healer God chose in Christ to be a miraculous healer who truly does wipe away all bodily ailments, but who does not choose to always work in this way, is not a question that I have a satisfying answer for. But I do know this: God heals, is healing all the time, heals you and me, and through you and through me, and not always in the way I want or expect him to. So, if healing doesn't always look like a mother miraculously leaping out of bed and rejoining her family at the dinner table, happy and healthy, then what does it actually mean to say that we have a God who always heals? Well, first of all, of course, sometimes healing is about helping another person's body along the path back to health. Somebody got me antibiotics all those times I had strep throat, and I'm grateful for it. Doing what is in our power as mortal beings to preserve the sacred lives of other children of God is a part of being servants of a healing God. Some people are called to entire lives of restoring the human body as doctors, nurses, and professional caregivers. In their care for us, they truly become the hands of our great physician, of our God who heals. But in another way, healing is not always about ending the suffering. Too often we're not able to do that. But rather it's about seeing, hearing, and sharing in that suffering. God knows there's no cure for the common cold, but I've known healing all those sniffly winters at the hands of people who care for me by being with me. When we heal by accompanying others through their pains and illnesses, woes and failures, we accept our powerlessness to fix all things and heal by being vessels of the loving presence of God, who heals wounds both seen and unseen. In yet another way, sometimes the service of a healing God is not actually about individuals at all. Healers of the wounds of society work their craft on the streets and in the home and on Zoom and in the halls of power, whenever they direct their gifts toward the service of charity and justice. Sometimes it's not just about these bodies that get sick, but also the collective body of the people of God, which gets sick also. God heals nations, as well as mothers-in-law. And God does so often in the form of people who believe in the vision of a better world and who play their part, however big or small, in striving to make it a reality. Then, of course, there is the greatest healing of all. The mending of a bond ripped asunder between maker and maid, the renewing of love between parent and child, the restoration of a universe whose unfathomable vastness does nothing to diminish the cosmic importance of that covenant of love between God and humanity. All this is the work of a healer who did die, to heal the wounds of his beloved people. It is a work never more visible than it was on a cross at dusk and at dawn on a hill in ancient Judea. Our God is a God who heals. In all these ways, and in many more that we cannot see, God heals by the outpouring of his compassionate will and through the hands and hearts of people like you and me. This is, of course, quite a time to be talking about healing. So especially in need of healing is our world right now, that consideration for one another's health compels us to keep our distance, to forego those loving touches that echo and emulate the simple placing of Jesus' hand in that woman's. Plague stalks the land. And in our hearts and minds, so in need of healing are we, that trust and confidence in one another and in our institutions is as frail as it's ever been. As freshly painful as this may all be, it is all part of the very old dance of a broken but beautiful creation. And as much weeping and mourning as we have all seen lately, how much laughing and love, too. How much healing love has come cascading like the waters of Dunning Spring, when it isn't frozen, in the midst of this pandemic, on the lips and in the hands of billions of people, healing in ways as countless as the stars above the black Mesopotamian night sky. In the midst of suffering, God is still healing. People get sick a lot. They get strep throat, they come down with fevers, they become fearful, addicted, and depressed. Sometimes they grow distant from their family, and sometimes they die. And sometimes together they build societies that oppress and forget and punish rather than uplift and serve and forgive. But in the midst of all of this is God. God who heals. So, like Simon's mother-in-law, let's be lifted up and healed to serve and heal others. Following Jesus, let us strengthen the powerless. Like Jesus, let us seek to renew our own strength in quiet times of prayer. As we do, Isaiah tells us that those who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles, and they shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. Our God does not faint or grow weary. Our God lives and reigns and loves and heals. Like Jesus at the bedside of Simon's mother-in-law, God takes us by the hand and lifts us up and sends us out to do some serving and loving and healing of our own. Thanks be to God. Amen.